And like I say, thank you for joining us today. Today, we're very lucky to be joined by Sarah Ojar, who's our own breastfeeding coordinator at PADS, who's going to talk to you about breastfeeding babies with Down syndrome and all the research that we've done into breastfeeding. Just as a way of introduction, because I've got you all here in one place, just in case you're new to our webinar, just give you a little bit of information about Positive About Down Syndrome. We are PADS, we are under the umbrella of the national charity Down Syndrome UK. We provide information to parents and professionals as well as peer support. We've got hopefully a load of Down syndrome experts that are able to give advice to you, not just as professionals, but also to the parents, obviously, that you're supporting. We do this sort of training, not just lunchtime webinars. We do more extensive training to professionals, as well as having information days for families. We're heavily involved in the lives of people with Down syndrome. We're part of campaigning groups and lobbying groups to make sure that people's voices are heard by the government. So we have a range of publications. Hopefully you know about Nobody Told Me book and the Little Book of Knowledge. Sarah's just recently published a booklet, which is Breastfeeding Your Baby with Down Syndrome, which hopefully you'll know about, but she'll tell you more about it anyway. And we have heart surgery experiences that you might like to share with any families that you come across. So this is what we do. We're involved heavily in maternity, obviously, it was where we started, but also we've moved on to school support as well. So, do get in contact if you need any more information. In terms of online support for expectant and new parents, hopefully you know about our closed Facebook groups, which are really safe spaces for parents, new and expectant parents, to share their experiences and get advice. So I'm just whizzing through this because it's just a bit of background before we get onto our main event, who is Sarah Ojar, who's going to talk to you about breastfeeding babies with Down syndrome. So over to you, Sarah.
Hi everybody, it's really nice to see so many of you here today. And yeah, as Lou said, I'm going to chat to you about breastfeeding a baby with Down syndrome. So I've been doing this role with PADS for about the last 2 years. I'm also a volunteer with the Breastfeeding Network, so I volunteer locally in Lambeth when I get the chance, and also on the National Breastfeeding Helpline. And I'm also a doula, and I also have 5 children of my own, including my little boy, which he's a little bit older than this now. He's 7 now. I think he's about 5 in this picture here, and this is Zeffie. And Zeffie has Down syndrome, and Zeffie was breastfed until he was 2.5. So the way my role came about was, as Lee mentioned, we've got these groups on Facebook, and we work with a lot of mums and families. And what we found was a lot of the families that were coming through our groups were not having the best experiences when it came to breastfeeding, and this was in regards to being told either when they were pregnant and they found out their baby had Down syndrome, being told, don't even bother trying to breastfeed. Babies with Down syndrome can't breastfeed. Or when the baby was born, just at the slightest hint of any problem, it was all blamed on the baby having Down syndrome, and they were sort of encouraged to move on to formula and things like that, and bottle feeding. And this obviously caused quite a lot of upset for families who really wanted to breastfeed. So we did a couple of surveys. We did one in July 2021, and we did another one in 2022, and it was quite eye-opening what we found from the results. And yeah, that sort of kind of led and guided what we do now, really. The survey report is available online, so but we're going to show a few slides from the survey during this presentation, but the full thing you can find online. So 34% of the women were first-time mums. 11% of them that filled it out hadn't planned to breastfeed. So that's just a few stats there. And this is just a little quote on inclusion. So inclusion isn't solely the responsibility of others, and it's easy to think of it as something in the workplace or in schools and nurseries, but inclusion starts at birth, and it includes the fundamental right to choose to feed your baby however you wish, and for people working with you to support that. And there's something that I really believe in. I believe that if you really want to breastfeed, then you know, people should have the support there, regardless of whether your baby's got Down syndrome, whether your baby is, you know, got the typical amount of chromosomes. That should be, you know, inclusive to everybody. So one of the things that we first did when we sort of look at the work that we do is we identify what challenges babies with Down syndrome face when it comes to breastfeeding. And what we do know is that many babies will just breastfeed successfully without the need for any additional support, and that's you know, very frequent, very common, as well as sort of babies having challenges. So a lot of the time, you know, babies are born, they just feed straight away, and you know, that's amazing. So we don't want people to think that there's always going to be a problem when it comes to breastfeeding babies with Down syndrome, because a lot of the time, you know, that's absolutely, you know, works well right from day one. And that's my little boy when he was a baby. I love that picture of him. Yeah, so the kind of problems that people are facing, we sort of realized split into sort of two areas. So there's the physiological side, which is linked to the actual baby, and then we've also got like a wider societal or like other influencing factors that can actually have an impact on the breastfeeding journey. So the physiological challenges that can affect breastfeeding, and these are probably things that you may have come across if you've worked with a baby with Down syndrome. So I think one of the key ones is hypotonia, which we know is low muscle tone. So babies with Down syndrome, the majority of babies with Down syndrome will have some kind of low muscle tone, and the extent of that varies, you know, and also the influence that has varies a lot as well. You know, I always share like a little story. When my son was a baby, he didn't feel like he had a lot of low tone. So when you held him, he didn't have that like floppy baby feeling that people talk about when they talk about babies with Down syndrome. And it was only when I held another a friend's baby that also had Down syndrome that I understood what that meant. And I was like, oh, he felt sort of like how you know, my other children might have felt when they were asleep. He almost felt like that, like when he was awake, which my son never felt like that. So in my mind, in my sort of like, you know, thinking I knew what was thinking, oh, I bet my son's going to walk like really early, and her son, because he feels like he's got a lot of low tone, I bet he's going to be a really late walker. And actually her son walked at 12 months and my son didn't walk until he was 2. So it just goes to show that, you know, it doesn't always have an impact on the milestones and on, you know, what's going on in the body, but it, you know, it can depend. So obviously when you're thinking about breastfeeding, we're thinking about the jaw, the mouth, the low tone there, and also just low tone throughout the rest of the body, the torso, and sort of like, you know, if you think when we're holding a baby and they are breastfeeding, we want them to be able to focus on you know, what's going on with the mouth and the jaw and the swallow. We don't want them to be having to worry about supporting their own body. So, you know, it's really important that we give a lot of support to the baby, like when we're feeding. What else can impact the baby? So surgery. Some babies with Down syndrome may have a heart condition that may result in a surgery, or there's some babies may have a bowel surgery. If it's a bowel surgery, they may not be able to take any food in until they have that surgery. So in this kind of case, we're looking at, and also the same for heart surgery, they may find breastfeeding too much like hard work. They might have to have some kind of high calorie supplement. So in that kind of case, what we're looking at is keeping the mum's milk supply going. And prematurity, and a lot of the time actually we're not talking about really prem babies, we're talking about that sort of late prem, early term, sort of 36, 37 weeks, and the challenges that any baby faces around then with being sleepy, which leads on to one of the other points. Potential delayed suck swallow mechanism, although I personally haven't seen that massively, but it can happen. Sleepiness, which is a key one for babies with Down syndrome. So they are often quite sleepy for longer than a typical baby might be sleepy for. I'm talking like weeks after they're born, especially those babies that are born a bit earlier, like I said, 36, 37 weeks and before. But even babies that are born at term, like full term 40 weeks, may have this sort of like sleepiness, and this is really like a key one that can kind of impact you know, on the baby. And also just keeping the milk supply going whilst, you know, we are establishing feeding whilst there's challenges going on, and how can we support the family to keep the milk supply going. And then looking at sort of like the wider societal challenges and things that are not specifically linked to the baby, but more sort of outside influence. So we've got over medicalisation of the baby. So it could be things like, you know, when the baby's first born, is the sort of golden time, the golden hour protected, or is the baby getting, you know, poked and prodded and tests? So they're tests, you know, that can we wait? Does this need to be done right now? Obviously, if it's like a life-saving measure, then, you know, that's what it is. But, you know, if that's not necessary, can the baby stay with mum and that be protected? Diagnostic overshadowing. So this is a really key one, I think, like when it comes to breastfeeding. What we don't want is you know, challenges to be faced with feeding and it to be blamed on the baby having Down syndrome. That would be a classic example of sort of diagnostic overshadowing, where actually it's just position and attachment issue, or it's a tongue tie, or it's all the other factors that, you know, would happen with a typical baby when it comes to breastfeeding challenges, but instead it's blamed on the baby having Down syndrome. So that's kind of something that we want to try and avoid. Women's mental health, we know from our survey that we've done that you know, the impact on having a negative feeding journey can impact on the mental health. And also, you know, whether or not a mum has found out during pregnancy that their baby might have Down syndrome, or whether they've been hit with this sort of surprise news, you know, an hour after the baby's been born, you know, everybody's going to take that news very differently. You know, some people are going to be, they're going to feel grief, they're going to feel just shock, they might feel sadness, they might be absolutely fine because they've known since the baby was, you know, since they were like 12 weeks pregnant, they might be absolutely fine with it. But yeah, that can all have an impact on the sort of the breastfeeding journey and bonding and things like that. Low expectations. So this is a key one that we've found, and that's from sort of and you know, it unfortunately not from everybody, but from some medical professionals. You know, the sort of comments like, oh, you know, don't try and breastfeed, it's not going to work, or lots of babies with Down syndrome just won't be able to breastfeed. You know, those kind of comments can have a big impact on the breastfeeding journey. Lack of info around colostrum harvesting and donor milk. So we're still finding that and this obviously especially for women that have found out their babies have Down syndrome or might have Down syndrome during the pregnancy specifically, haven't been talked to about harvesting colostrum. It doesn't seem to be like a standard thing that's recommended when they know a baby has Down syndrome, in the same way that it's recommended for, say, for instance, like gestational diabetes or twins. You know, in those pregnancies, it seems like it's a standard part of the course. Like at the 36-week appointment, they get, you know, told like this is a good thing to try, and that's what we want really for our babies. It's really important. And also just the option of donor milk, if that's available in their hospitals, you know, like let them know about it. Some people just don't know about it, so they wouldn't even know to ask. I know that it's like not available for everybody, and it depends on how much they have in stock, but if it is available, like, are they entitled to, you know, to have some of that? Another big one, which I'm going to show a picture of later on in the presentation, is the Down syndrome specific growth chart. So I'm not sure that usually whenever I do my training sessions, there's at least somebody who isn't aware that there is a specific growth chart for babies with Down syndrome. And what can happen if that growth chart's not being used is families are being told, you know, the baby's not putting on enough weight, let's supplement, you need to express, you need to give a top up. And actually, if the weight gain is plotted on the Down syndrome specific chart, the baby's doing absolutely fine. So, you know, that can have a big sort of like, not only does it knock the mum's confidence, can lead to like being in like a top up trap, or just ending up stopping breastfeeding because they just don't think they've got enough milk and things like that. And then another one that we came across is so a lot of babies, especially if they go to the NICU, the special care unit, are given an NG tube, even if it's you know, it seems like babies are just given them when they go there. I believe it's supposed to be done on a case by case basis, but it seems to be like the majority of babies just get given one anyway. And then a lot of families are coming home with the tube, and some families aren't feeling confident, or they're not feeling supported in how to actually transition the baby off the NG tube. And obviously this can result in babies having it for longer. And then when it comes to weaning them onto solids, there can be like oral aversions and things like that. So that's sort of another challenge that that we found. And we don't really need to preach to you guys about the benefits of breastfeeding. You guys should all know this, and you do all know this. Specifically for babies with Down syndrome, it's amazing for the bonding, and even more so, improved mental well-being, pride and accomplishment. This is a thing that mums have specifically said to us, that they it made them feel like they were doing something towards helping their baby. So that's really, really important. Improved confidence in meeting baby's needs, increased oral strength, which obviously helps with weaning onto food and with speech, improved immune system, gut health, contribution to brain development, and helps to shape the palate and space teeth. All really good benefits. And these are some quotes from, I think these came from our first survey that we did, just some experiences that some of our families have had. So midwife suggested she wouldn't be able to latch and didn't have the strength to suckle, advises Jodie, mum to Libby, who'd been keen to breastfeed her firstborn. My hopes to breastfeed were not really embraced. I had support whilst in hospital, but no real support afterwards. I received a phone call from a breastfeeding specialist once discharged, and that was all, and it wasn't very helpful. Amy, mum to Connie, was advised by a doctor in the NICU that it would be unlikely that she'd be able to breastfeed and not to get my hopes up. And 9 months on, then they're having a great breastfeeding experience. And I fed Libby exclusively on breast milk via expressing every 2 hours for 12 weeks. She never took to feeding directly from the breast. And I don't feel I had the right support to make it work. So just a few experiences there. And so this is some of the findings from our survey. So the latest survey said 46% of women were advised by a healthcare professional that they may not be able to breastfeed their infant purely because of the baby having Down syndrome. So that's nearly half the people that are still getting told that this information. And over half, so 54%, advised that they did not receive the support they needed around breastfeeding from their midwifery team. And we know that midwives, if there's any midwives here, like, I know that you guys are just so like stretched and everything. So I don't want you to think like we're putting a downer on you guys, because we know that you're doing like an amazing job. And this is just about, sharing how our families are feeling sort of around, the breastfeeding support. And this is a really, these are a couple of statistics. So I know that the UNICEF infant feeding survey, which I believe is coming back, which is amazing news, was last conducted in 2010. And at that time, the breastfeeding initiation rate was 81%. And our survey for breastfeeding a baby with Down syndrome, we've had an initiation rate of 77%, which is close, with the national sort of statistic. And this is one that a statistic that I really love. And it showed the UNICEF data showed at 6 months, just 34% of women were still doing some breastfeeding. And yet within our community and the people we surveyed, we still had 66% of women breastfeeding at 6 months, which we just think is an amazing, statistic. And we've sort of dug into this a little bit, like informally, as to like, why it is still so high at 6 months. And I think one of the reasons is that because it can sometimes take longer to establish, some of these mums might not have got into the full flow of feeding until like 3 to 4 months. So actually they've worked so hard to get breastfeeding. They don't want to give up, at 6 months, they're just getting started, and secondly, it's this whole feeling that you're doing something beneficial to your baby, and that sense of pride. And often, when you have a baby with Down syndrome or any other sort of medical complexities, you can often feel a bit out of control, and like a lot of things are going on with your baby that you don't have a hand in, that you can't control. So to know that you can breastfeed your baby is it's something that you can really sort of feel like you're having an impact. And also, it's like, I know with my son specifically, it was so comforting for him, like when he had to go to appointments, or if he had to have a blood test or all that additional stuff, like to be able to breastfeed him and comfort him in that way was just, it was, so valuable. So successful feeding support, what does that look like? So you know, whilst we're saying to you, what we don't want you to tell, you know, what we don't want you saying is that, you know, babies with Down syndrome are going to struggle to breastfeed or aren't going to breastfeed. We don't want to go the opposite way and tell people, oh, it's definitely going to be fine. It's all going to be easy. There's not going to be any challenges. We want it to be informed and realistic expectations. So yes, you've got an amazing chance at being able to breastfeed your baby. It may or may not, but it may take a little bit longer to establish. And here's how we can support you in that. So back to basics first, like I mentioned, if you come across a family who are struggling with breastfeeding their baby with Down syndrome, let's first go back to basics, look at position and attachment, any physical restrictions, things like that, and then sort of look at actually, is it the low tone, you know, and all the sort of additional things that can come alongside with that. And awareness of what helps with low muscle tone, such as having a really supportive hold. Do they need any additional cushions? Do they need a different kind of cushion to one they're using? Being aware of the dancer hold, which is, there's a picture of that there. So it's sort of a hold where you, as you can see there, you use the thumb and the forefinger to cup underneath the baby's chin and the other fingers go on the breast. And it's almost just helping the baby to attach to the breast, giving them support in that area, which can mean that the milk transfer is more efficient, more effective, and the baby can, you know, tires less because you're giving them that support. And actually, even just a finger, like if you close that position can be quite tricky to do, like depending on what position you're holding the baby in. So even just a finger like underneath the baby's chin, so not so tight that it stops the baby from actually like being able to move, but just gently going with the baby, the flow of just giving a little bit of extra support can really help. Yeah, and also what we've found is, I know that nipple shields don't always get the best like reputation sort of within breastfeeding support circles, but actually some of our mums have said that that's been like the game changer for them. Like being able to feed their baby with a nipple shield has meant that they've been able to then actually breastfeed directly from the breast, like rather than using a bottle. And of course, after a few weeks, majority they've been able to wean the baby off them and just sort of like slip them off like halfway through a feed. But yeah, so if it's something that, you know, you don't normally recommend to people, it might be worth giving a try. If they've tried all the other sort of tactics and it's still not working, that nipple shields may work. Again, the options of donor milk, especially in the NICU setting, I believe it's looked at, as I said before, looked at on a case-by-case basis. And I think because of the fact that people with Down syndrome can be more at risk of issues with the stomach, like down in the long run, I believe they are quite high on the priority for donor milk. That's what they told me with my son, when basically my son wasn't told he couldn't have it, but then when I sort of spoke about it to them in a debrief later on, they said actually he probably should have you know, had it, which, you know, was right. Yeah, and also, yeah, this whole thing around the NG tube. So if you've got a family where the baby has got a tube and they're going home with the tube, how can we, you know, transition the baby from this, either from the tube to a bottle, or even cup feeding and finger feeding. We're not limited to just breast or bottle. You know, if the family sort of want to try alternative feeding techniques whilst they sort of establish feeding, then, you know, how can we support them on that? And then also ensuring the growth chart is the correct one is used, so that the weight gain expectations are accurate. I cannot emphasize like how important this one is, because it can be so disheartening to a family to be feeding and thinking everything's going well, and then to be told your baby's not putting enough weight on. It almost puts the responsibility like on the mum, and, you know, it can be quite you know, really sad for the mum to feel like she's not you know, producing enough milk, or not, the baby's not feeding well enough, when actually it's, you know, it's all fine. So yeah. And looking at sort of successful wider support, so, you know, the bigger picture, we're looking at what knowledge do you have of local and national support such as PADS, but do you know what local support you have? A lot of areas in the country have a local breastfeeding charity. Like, do you have like their information? Could you signpost families to that? They often offer like buddying schemes, or later down the line like therapies and things like that. So, you know, to be given that information by somebody is so helpful. Otherwise mums and the whole family often just sort of left a bit like, who do I turn to, where do I go? And sometimes they don't get this information until like 3 or 4 months later down the line. And actually, if they'd had it from the beginning, they can have that support earlier. Signposting to Down syndrome specific breastfeeding resources. So we've got the guide that we did last year, and we've also got a really nice like guide. It's a lived experience, so it shares loads of families' own like breastfeeding experiences as well, and then also just the usual. All the sort of major breastfeeding organizations all have like a page on Down syndrome, so like the BFN and Let's League, like they've all got like resources on there for breastfeeding babies with Down syndrome. So supporting parents that may choose to exclusively pump if they are unable to establish breastfeeding, or even if that's their choice that they don't want to breastfeed, just letting them know that actually this is an option. It's challenging, but it's doable, and the baby will still get all those benefits from breastfeeding. And then things like language as well. So think about the language that you're using. I mean, language is and this is such a big point. Lou does like an entire like presentation on this. So I feel like, minimizing it down to like 2 bullet points, but language and generalizations. Downs baby, we don't use that language. We want to avoid that language. And also like, does reference to the baby having Down syndrome, is that even needed? So if the baby's latching well, but it's just a bit of position and attachment, do we need to even mention that? Is it something that needs to be raised? And also generalization, so like, and sweeping statements. So the majority of these, I know they come from like such a good place, and it's like, saying things like, oh, babies with Down syndrome, they're always so happy, aren't they? And it's like, it comes from a good place, but it's so dehumanizing, because it's like, these are real people, these are real children that have all the like emotions. They're not happy all the time. They get angry, they get sad, so to sort of make a generalization like that is even though it might sound nice at the time, actually can be quite damaging. And also just sensitivity to the situation. So as I mentioned before, a family that have had months to get used to a diagnosis might be in a different place to somebody who's just found out, or maybe they've not even got their results back, it's just a suspicion at this time, and things like that. So just kind of being a bit sensitive. And also actually, a family that has known for months and months and has chosen to continue with their pregnancy doesn't mean that they aren't struggling with the situation, or they might still be not okay, but they like, for us personally, like, we found out during the pregnancy, and it was just assumed that even though we chose to continue the pregnancy, that we were just like completely fine, and because of that we didn't need any support, when actually it was a very lonely time. It was very hard, and I could have done with somebody just saying like, are you okay, like I'm here to chat, do you want to talk, things like that. So yeah, just being sensitive to the situation, and like you would do in any other kind of like situations that you come across during your your work. And yeah, and this is the insert. So we've got the red book there, and this is what the insert looks like. So it's green, and it has all the charts, so it's all green. It's got the boys, the girls, the weight, I think it's got height as well. I can't remember, mainly I deal with the weight. And it also has altered milestones as well. So in the red book you have like the milestones, so like when's your baby sitting up or starting to make noises and all of that. They have a separate section for babies with Down syndrome. So it's just really nice, because it's instead of looking and seeing like, oh, my baby should be doing this by this age, it actually gives an adjusted like time scale for when your baby might meet those milestones as well, which is also really, really nice for families to have. And yeah, it's key. And going forward, there's some of the things that we've got like planned, updating and developing more training and resources. The guide that I produced last year, I've already got like extra things I want to sort of put in and update some of the pictures. We tried to get the best pictures we could in the guide, and I want to put a disclaimer in there just to say that the pictures are showing like real. They weren't like taken in a studio, so we've done our best. They're not perfect like representation of like breastfeeding positions, but they're representative and they're inclusive, which is kind of like the key thing that we were going for. More information sharing sessions. We are planning on doing a healthcare professionals survey this year, rather than a survey on parents. We want to look at you know, support, like how confident you are in supporting and who's got experience with support, like things like that, so that we can know how to target and where to target our like training collaborations. I don't know if any of you listen to Emma Pickett's like Milk Matters podcast, but I've recorded a podcast with her, and that's coming out in March, close to World Down Syndrome Day. So yeah, look out for that. And I know Nicola, who's the sort of founder of the charity, she's working on some NG tube feeding research and looking at the pathways, you know, of that. So yeah, if anybody needs any other information or they want to chat about anything, you can email me anytime. And yeah, I'll hand back to Lou.
Thanks, Sarah. So I always find this really, really interesting. I'm just going to show you a couple more slides, and then we've got plenty of time for questions if you have any. In terms of our website, information is on our website, which is downsyndromeuk.co.uk. Don't forget that we have a closed Facebook group for maternity professionals that you'll be able to, if you go onto the professionals part of our website, you'll be able to see how to join that. And our next webinar is it's a Down Syndrome Awareness webinar in conjunction with Down Syndrome Awareness Week. And we have 4 lovely people with Down syndrome that are going to share their, you know, the everyday lives of them, just so that you're more aware of what young people with Down syndrome are able to achieve in the 21st century. So put that date in your diary. And I think that's about it, really. If you wanted, oh, there you go, there's our website address once again. But do get in contact with Sarah if you've got any specific breastfeeding questions, or you need any more information.